This podcast is produced by the Center for Deployment Psychology at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. The views expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Uniformed Services University, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. In addition, references to any specific companies, products, processes, or services does not necessarily constitute or imply endorsement by the Uniformed Services University, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. Welcome to CDP's podcast, Practical for Your Practice,
where we give you actionable intel to support what you do.
One colleague to another.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Practical for Your Practice. I am Dr. Kevin Holloway, one of your hosts, and I'm joined, of course, as always, by the fabulous, brilliant Dr. Corinne Lefkowitz. Welcome, Corinne.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm not feeling pretty fabulous or brilliant this morning, so we'll see what happens.
Then you're in for a treat, because I imagine the discussion today will make us all feel fabulous and wonderful, right? It's one of those very uplifting, happy. In many ways, I'm glad you mentioned this, because I think all of us providers are oftentimes, I don't know if weary is the right word or concerned, but certainly any of us that have worked with clients that have had suicidal thoughts, suicidal crises, that's a concern that a lot of us have about serving these clients, these patients well. And our topic for today is kind of a tough one, I think, but I think a really, really important one. And joining us is Dr. Megan Harvey. And she'll be talking with us a little bit about postvention around suicide. So welcome, Megan. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here. I'm a bit of a podcast junkie, so I'm
awesome.
jazzed to be here. And my kids are also aware that today's podcast day, and they were pretty happy about that for me. So,
nice.
As a psychologist, we don't get a lot of the celebrity moments. So this feels closer to that than maybe I'll ever have. So anyhow, thanks for having me. But so I'm a psychologist and I work for the VA. I've been with the federal government, with the VA now for over 15 years. And I received my doctorate from the University of Cincinnati and did my postdoctoral. I did my internship with VA and then my postdoctoral work with the University of Colorado. Lived and worked in Denver for a long time at the Denver facility and then moved back to my hometown of Cincinnati not too long ago. And I now work with the Rocky Mountain MIRECC for suicide prevention. So I'm delighted to be here, and it's been a really lovely career that has offered me a lot of opportunities to support the mission for serving veterans. So happy to be here.
Glad to have you. And for those that are listening that may not know, the Rocky Mountain MIRECC is really involved in a lot of research and outreach efforts and intervention efforts around suicide and suicide prevention. Would that be accurate to say? Yeah. Absolutely.
So we do a variety of different things within the MIRECC. So MIRECC stands for Mental Illness Research, Education, and Clinical Center. And there are a handful of MIRECCs across the nation within VA. Ours is focused on suicide prevention. And so there are several research studies going on right now and that have been happening in the past that support suicide prevention work and trying to understand sort of the underlying determinants of suicide and how we can better intervene. There's some clinical trials that are happening as well. We provide education and try and really make research accessible and offer things that clinicians can use in their day-to-day. So that is the education piece of it. I work under the clinical section, and we do a variety of different implementation projects within the enterprise, as well as we do clinical services. One of the programs that I'll talk about toward the end is our suicide risk management consultation program, and that's within our clinical program. And in that context, we offer postvention as well as consultation on other challenges that come up in doing this work. As you mentioned, Kevin, suicide prevention is challenging, and the topic of suicide is often one that people want to not have to talk about. And so if we can offer support and help, that's what we're here for.
I appreciate that introduction, Megan. I also worked in the VA system for many years prior to coming to CDP. And man, even just as you're introducing that, I'm having a lot of memories of tough situations, tough clinical situations, losses that occurred while I was there. And so I think this is going to be a rich but maybe difficult discussion.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I'm glad you're here to guide us through it. Maybe we can start by having you define a bit what postvention is.
Sure. So while we really, I think a lot of people are more familiar with the concept of suicide prevention and trying to stop suicide, fewer may know about the term suicide postvention and what that entails. So what I'm talking about is the immediate and ongoing support that's provided to people who are impacted by a suicide loss. So as much as we would like to prevent suicide, we are also very aware that at this point, suicide is one of the leading causes of death in the nation. And within the veteran population, this remains a significant challenge and problem. So what do we do in the aftermath, I think, is the question that postvention tries to answer. And from the perspective of a provider or a clinician, I think the field in general has focused more on the administrative processes that happen when someone you work with has died.
Absolutely.
It's working with your management around chart reviews, morbidity, mortality reviews, et cetera, things that can feel pretty anxiety provoking and add
shameful.
to stress, shameful, yes, and assume that you had some role in what happened. Although there are purposes, and I think the reasons why things like that happen is so that we can learn, so that we can better understand what happened for the person, what happened with our clinical services, is there anything that we can improve upon? But what often gets lost is the personal impact for the provider. So postvention does not do any of the administrative work. Instead, it's really built to help people who are in the throes of grief, in the aftermath of grief. So go ahead, Kevin.
I was just going to say, I really, really appreciate that, because while, suicide prevention, suicide research isn't one of my specialties, I think, I think like many providers, we do hear about, kind of basic skills we need to have when, working with clients who may have suicidal ideation. And when I hear about postvention, I usually hear about working with family members and friends and maybe coworkers of the person who has died by suicide, and almost nothing about working with the provider who may have lost a client. And beyond the administrative stuff you were just talking about, like I've not heard much at all about what do we do to support that therapist. So I really appreciate this. I'm looking forward to hearing more about this.
Sure. I think that, and my experience throughout my career has been varied, and I'm grateful for that. One of the hats I wore for a while was more of a leadership hat, administrative role. So I saw it from that end of things, I think. But when I started at the MIRECC, thinking about and learning about postvention in a different way, and acknowledging that many providers, many of us will lose someone to suicide at some point in their career. We can't expect that will never happen. It's sort of like a medical doctor who works in primary care. Some point in their careers, one of their patients will likely die of a heart attack or some other cause, right? So similarly, we can anticipate that loss may happen. And what is so important is to acknowledge that loss to suicide can have a very profound impact, both personally and professionally. I don't know about the two of you, but I can say that, I got a lot of advice as a younger clinician. And then as my career evolved around leaving work at work,
Mhm.
and I've never been great at that. I do okay, but I think sometimes we take the work with us. If it's a heavy
Yeah.
content piece of work that we're doing, I know that you do some prolonged exposure, Kevin. I do as well, and so sometimes stuff comes with us. Hopefully
Yeah.
not, but sometimes it does, and that's just the reality. And I think that with suicide loss in particular, to really normalize that the provider is going through a process of grief, and they're having a range of grief reactions that are going to show up at home just like they do at work. So we can't expect a person to sort of leave it there and not be impacted. We come to really know the people that we work with. We come to
Yeah.
really enjoy them as humans and care a great deal about them. So when they die, and then they die tragically to suicide, then of course we're going to have reactions, we're going to have grief experiences, and a whole variety of other impacts that I can share a little more about if you'd like.
Yeah, I was just going to say too that I think certainly working with trauma, this is something that we encounter, and I haven't, luckily, I will knock on wood, I have not had a client who has died by suicide, but I acknowledge that it certainly could happen. But I think about too, like you kind of have this added layer of difficulty processing that because of of course the need to protect confidentiality, even after a client has died, by suicide perhaps or by other means, and so it also feels like there's limits on how you can process this. You can't just talk about it with just anybody and work through that because of the difficulty of needing and appreciating, acknowledging the need to protect confidentiality.
Yeah. And thank you for saying that, Kevin, because I felt myself wanting to have like a group therapy session of asking, like, have you ever lost somebody from suicide? So thank you for acknowledging that you haven't. I've been thinking about my own experience where I have lost a patient to suicide. And Megan, so much of what you're saying really resonates from the reality that immediately after it happened, my reaction was just shame, like, oh, what are other providers going to think of me? I had a student at the time who was involved in the case. What's the student going to think about the experience? What's the chart review going to look like? Did I document everything appropriately? And then, and even now, as we're talking about it, my knee-jerk reaction is I want to be able to tell you, but these were the details that explain what happened, right? Like I want to absolve myself of guilt. The next piece is really the emotional piece that came because, like you're saying, Megan, I cared about this client, care about all my clients, don't want this to happen, and was unable to talk about it with many people. Now, I'm so lucky that my supervisor at the time was incredible. And she said something to me that has stuck with me. This is 10 plus years out. And she said something along the lines of, we need to acknowledge that sometimes things like depression and PTSD are fatal diseases. Are lethal diseases. Very much similar to, Megan, I think what you were saying about how a physician has to accept that they're going to lose patients sometimes. And that was really helpful for me to hear. But I wonder if my experience is similar to what you hear from other providers or different, or what you're hearing from people who call in for consultation.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry that you went through that experience, and sorry that you had that loss. I'm also sorry for the student as well. I think the impact for those who are newer in their careers is something that we are thinking more about, because it is, I think it's a vulnerable time just generally. We're trying to find our footing and start to gain some more confidence. And so when loss happens, I think it can really shake a person's confidence no matter where they are in their career. But certainly in your earlier phases. So I hope that person, I'm sure that if they were working with you, that you were gracious and gave them support that they needed. But that's also hard to do when you're also going through
Right.
the scenario yourself. And I do think, people talk about feeling pretty alone and feeling pretty stigmatized, not knowing who they can talk to and share with. And so because what we do is offer individual postvention processing sessions that are really focused on normalizing the grief reaction, giving a space for the person to share how they're doing. It's not like therapy, but a one-time interaction where we can sit with the person, sit with their grief together, give them a space to talk and acknowledge that this is really challenging, give some information about what they might expect, and in normalizing, also just acknowledging that some things are likely showing up. So you talked about guilt. There's this sense of responsibility and ownership that I think providers have, and assumptions that they make themselves about their own responsibility for this person's actions. And ultimately, it was sadly and tragically their choice. And that is something that is hard to grapple with. And there's a term that I think applies so poignantly to this experience. It's called the tyranny of hindsight. So there's this sense of, it's the epitome of Monday morning quarterbacking, right? So what should I have done? What could I have done? And that can, you can start to ruminate on all the different pieces of that person's clinical care that they received, that what did you miss? What did you not say? What was the last interaction like?
Yeah.
And on and on and on.
Which can sometimes be reinforced by those necessary administrative processes where we're looking at, what were the conditions prior to, what were the points of contact, and almost not intentionally, but almost reinforces those concerns. Like if we had just done X, Y, or Z, maybe this could have been avoided.
That's right. And I think when we are able to do postvention, the aim really is to get resources to the person early on and offer support early on, because what we have come to know is that experiencing a loss to suicide and being a survivor of loss is in and of itself a risk factor for suicide. So this is sort of downstream and upstream suicide prevention type work, if you will.
Yeah.
So if we can start to offer and make connections with people early, then we can give them some tools, reinforce coping strategies, encouraging them to see the self-doubt that might be showing up as a professional, and maybe take a step back and recognize, wow, I've become very risk averse, and I'm making decisions clinically that maybe aren't that helpful to the people that I'm serving, because I'm really scared that this is going to happen again.
Yeah.
And what will this mean if it does? Right.
Yeah, really, that resonates quite a bit. Like I can remember immediately after rethinking everything, do I really want to do prolonged exposure anymore? Do I really want to do these types of treatments that maybe are a bit riskier or push patients to be on their comfort zone, and other ways of being risk averse as well? So that really sounds familiar. And I appreciate you couching it in, the sense of we still need to be mindful of what good clinical care looks like, even in the aftermath of a suicide loss.
Yeah.
It occurs to me too, though, as we're talking about this, there certainly are a lot of impacts to the provider themselves, and therefore the kinds of decisions they might make or how they might interact with other of their clients in the future from there. And I wonder too about kind of just stepping out another layer from that, like in that workplace, in that clinic, or, what are the impacts within that clinic or of work processes or, coworkers interactions that can come from a client dying by suicide, and are there resources to help, I guess, support the larger group of people that might be involved.
Sure. And before we shift to the broader workplace, I will just encourage providers who may be listening that if you find yourself in this situation, I think that there's a couple things that I would really strongly suggest. So first of all, find someone to talk to, right? So if that's a supervisor, if that's a close friend that you can share openly with, if it is your own therapist that you work with that can help just support and offer a space for you to grieve, to air your self-doubt, to work through some of the unhelpful cognitions that are likely showing up. So that I think is really important. And we have a provider section, which we can post in the notes for our podcast today.
Yeah.
About that offers a really great link to the Uniting to Support Postvention website. And that includes a link for providers themselves who are loss survivors. And there's a lot of great information there. And that's an outward facing website that we designed really to help support loss survivors. And so we have a section in there for providers. We also have a section for the workplace, and we'll be talking about that here in just a moment. And then also there are great resources, and I've come to learn that there is a coalition of clinician survivors who have themselves developed a website, and they offer support groups. So great way to connect with other folks who are walking a similar road. And
that's amazing.
In a way that's outside of your organization, because sometimes that might not feel like the safest place to be doing this with a supervisor, for example. So I wanted to offer that, and then I wanted to just to answer your question, Kevin. I think the workplace is an environment that can really be impacted. So I think there is a scenario like we're talking about with Corinne bravely sharing about her own experience. So what can a workplace do to support that type of loss? And I think that looks like supervisors being aware, supervisors knowing that a loss has occurred, asking and checking in with their employees, with those providers. What do you need? Are there things that you would find helpful within your work? Is there a certain type of work that you're doing right now that you want to step away from, and you can fill in the blanks with something else? So there are things like a supervisor might work with a person and say, really, what do you need? What do you need? How is the workload? Do you want to take some time off? Some people find that they need some space. Some people find that the work itself is really helpful because it offers a schedule, it offers routine, and they get support from their colleagues and coworkers. Maybe they shift their duties a little bit. So the supervisor can do a lot in that scenario. In a healthy work environment, it can be a place for the provider to move through the grief and find the emotional support. And then coworkers themselves can offer emotional support and tangible support as well. So I think that if it's a colleague of yours that's going through a loss to suicide, checking in with them periodically, sending a quick Teams message, hey, thinking of you. I hope you're having a good day. Let me know if you need anything. Or, hey, let's go out for a cup of coffee and just take 30-minute break together and just check in. And you can also ask to learn more about the person, learn more about the work that you did together. I think that can be an important, tangible way. So these are like small things that I think add up to make a big difference.
Yeah, big impact.
Yeah, small things, but yeah, they add up to something huge. And I particularly appreciate that you're identifying that every provider may need something different, right? The first step is to ask, what do you need? How can we help you get through this? But for some, it may be, working more. For some people, it may be working less, depending on what they need. It might be talking about it. It might be talking about anything but it. So I really appreciate recognizing that every loss is not the same. Every provider is not the same. People will need different things. But having that dialogue.
Good. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that's helpful. And I do want to zoom out even further. So we've been talking a little bit about an individual loss for a provider within the context of their clinical work. And I just want to acknowledge that loss to suicide happens for other groups of people as well within a coworker scenario, workplace scenario. So for example, we have worked with teams who are anticipating a coworker returning to work after extended leave because of a personal loss to suicide and not knowing what do I say? I don't know what to say to this person. I'm really nervous. I want to support them. I'm going to say the wrong thing and what will happen, and I don't want to hurt them. What we often say is saying nothing is the equivalent of saying the wrong thing. So we want to be able to acknowledge in some way, even if you just say, I don't know what to say right now, but I just want you to know that I'm glad you're back at work and I'm really sorry for what you went through. And
so important.
So important. I mean, I think we can all think about scenarios where you're like, I'm going to put my foot in my mouth. It's better for me not to say anything. But the person who's returning to work is feeling very alone and feeling a lot of stigma. And so if we can say the person's name, the deceased person's name, I'm so sorry to hear about John. Can you share a little bit with me sometime about him? Some of your happy memories that you have or the things that you liked about John? So that's an example of something that could really make an impact. And if you feel like you can't do it right off the bat, that's okay. This experience of grief is one that will take some time, take a lot of time. And we have the holidays upon us right now. That's a good time to check in with people, see how they're doing. Anniversaries are another time, birthdays, if you know of those. So that's one thing I wanted to share. And then another is sometimes, tragically and sadly, we may lose a coworker to suicide. And I just want to encourage listeners who may have some responsibility in the leadership realm how important it is to acknowledge loss and acknowledge the death of a team member, should that happen, while respecting privacy laws. What we see is leadership gets pretty scared. I think they're ruffled by this type of loss and this event more than perhaps other events that they're used to managing. And I think a good rule of thumb is, how do we handle any other death by any other cause for one of our employees? So putting out a notification soon after it happens that while acknowledging and respecting privacy laws, promotes hope and healing, offers resources, and provides a notification and acknowledgement of the person that is part of the organization who has died and the work that they did while they were part of the organization. So I think that's so important. And that is one thing. So if I could leave that message for people who are in positions that may be able to make an impact with those early messages, that's something I would just really strongly encourage, because when it's not handled in a way that offers transparency and support, people feel that. And this is a way that we can offer support for the people who are confused, grieving, and at a loss for what to do next. So
thank you, Megan. Those tips of what to do at every level, really every level, from the individual provider to the larger organization, are so helpful. And I appreciate that one of the aspects of that is recognizing that sometimes you worry you could say the wrong thing, or therefore you say nothing at all. And those are examples of course, what we all fear may happen, ways that we might fear doing the wrong thing. And that is kind of a natural segue into talking about maybe a time when things didn't go as planned for you, Megan. So to give you some context, in this season, we've been asking all of our guests to share with us a confession, if you will, of a time when something didn't go right, something went sideways, or at least something went unexpectedly, whether it was in your own case or in consultation or something along those lines, not as a way of embarrassing us, because as we've talked about, there's enough stigma already that exists in this field. We don't need more, but rather as an opportunity to, first of all, normalize that things go wrong sometimes, or things go unexpectedly, and that we can often recover or at least learn a lesson to help us move forward from that. So I wonder, do you have something that, an experience that you'd be willing to share with our listeners?
Sure. And I can think about one comes to mind for postvention work. So as I noted, one of the things that we do in our suicide risk management consultation program is offer postvention processing. And sometimes that is in a group format, and sometimes it's individual based. And I'm recalling a time when we had a group of providers, a team was coming together to begin processing the loss. And I was nervous. I was newer doing postvention work. I was nervous. I had notes up because it was remote. And I think I was about 5 minutes in, maybe, and I realized I'd never even said my name. I took a breath to introduce myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I just took a step back, and I just acknowledged it. I just put a name to the whole thing. I'm feeling nervous. I want to do well for you, and I also recognize I didn't even share my name, and that this is hard what you're going through. And I think that, I hope anyway, that it came across in a way that helped me feel relatable, perhaps, and kind of walking together in this human journey that we're in, and knowing that none of us have the exact right things to say at the exact right moment in every case, or even most of the time. So just acknowledge.
Response certainly sounded human and genuine in that moment of acknowledging, I'm nervous and I want to do a good job for you. I imagine and hope that landed just as it landed for me today, sounding just being honest and upfront about it.
And what an important time to really be human with another human in that room, right? When things are can be so personal, in an experience like that. So, man, thank you for sharing that. I think, in some ways it helps me feel like, hey, in the future, when I'm encountering a situation like this, I have some ideas on what to do, and I don't have to be perfect at it. And in fact, even just saying something, even if it's not the perfect something, it doesn't have to be my responsibility to fix it for that person, but just be with them in that space.
That's it. That's exactly it. And it's sort of maybe a segue to a shameless plug that I have for our consultation service. So our suicide risk management consultation program offers a whole variety of different levels of support for providers who are doing the work of supporting, treating, walking with veterans who may be at risk for suicide. So the program does a variety of things that can support teams, support providers who are working with veterans and maybe are challenged by things like how to navigate a lethal means safety scenario, or what to do for veterans who are having a unsuccessful level of engagement that is making it more challenging to get the help that they need to deal with the risk and to get them moving forward in their recovery, talking through various scenarios that can apply to multiple veterans. But we also do postvention in that work. And so there's a subgroup of us that is available to help. And we do a variety of different consultations. And so if you do find yourself in this scenario as a leader, as a colleague, a coworker, not knowing what to do, not knowing what to say, give us a call. Give us as quick as an email. We'll put the contact information in there for you.
Yep.
It's free. It's available for providers, both in the VA as well as non-VA providers who are serving veterans at risk. So if there's been a loss to suicide and your organization is struggling a little bit with what to do next, we are available. And if we can't help, we will get you to people who can. So I think that as long as we can come together and support one another, we'll all be in a better place. Our hashtag is never worry alone.
Yes.
That's what this is about. And that applies to prevention as well as postvention. So I do hope that we hear from folks, and we would be happy to provide that. Again, it's free. And we our aims are to provide people with support and education that can be helpful for the work that they do, because we really appreciate the importance of what you do each day. Serving
Absolutely.
others and helping them move forward is really crucial. So thank you for that.
So true. We wrap up every episode talking about actionable intel, things that people can do right now, like that they can take away from listening to this episode and apply to their clinical work right now. And I got a few from our discussion so far. Number one is just what you just said. Like listeners to our show who have listened to many episodes will know that we constantly talk about consultation and pound consultation. And I love that you provided some resources here for consultation. Don't worry alone. Absolutely. That would be number one, it sounds like to me, for our discussion today. Number two would be, kind of like find somebody you can talk to, whether that's a colleague or, a close friend, somebody that you can really confide in and really have those, process through some of those experiences. Should you find yourself in that situation of a client dying by suicide or, a coworker. And then it sounds like number three is, man, Megan, you've provided so many awesome resources. We're going to put all those on the show notes, links and services and all sorts of things. So number three would be check out the resources, like get familiar with what's out there, perhaps even before you feel like you need those services, like know that they're there and know that they're there so you can recommend them to perhaps colleagues too that find themselves in this situation as well. Corinne, anything you'd add?
Yeah, I have one to add, which is the notion that Megan mentioned of also supporting other colleagues who maybe have had a suicide
Absolutely.
loss. So if you know somebody who's had a loss, particularly of suicide, say something, acknowledge it, even if part of that is saying, I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you. That's an important takeaway for me.
I love the thing that you said, Megan, that saying nothing is similar to saying the wrong thing. So say something that's going to stick with me after this episode.
Mm-hmm.
So good. Yeah. And I will say one of the resources that will connect providers to the idea of developing a postvention plan, sort of in the spirit of what you're saying, Kevin.
Yeah.
I think it's so good to do it in a proactive way. Who will I outreach? If you're in private practice, what is my insurance information? Having it on just one piece of paper so that when you're in that moment of kind of feeling shock and not knowing what to do, you've already written it out. You've already got a good sense of a plan and you've thought about it in advance. So you might come to it in a different place than you would otherwise. So I think that's a great, also a great tip that I hadn't had a chance to discuss. So thank you for that. And I think you hit all the points. I'm glad that, we were able to come together and talk about it.
Me too. I thank you for coming. Like I've really enjoyed this discussion. I know we've had some interactions before, but man, this is so great to have this conversation to talk about things that are not necessarily happy or joyful, but I'm actually feeling like I've got some useful tools and some things to think about. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, this was a tough conversation. Thanks for taking us through it.
Yeah.
Again, in a very human way, which I appreciate.
Well, thanks for making space for it. I think this is how we start to make the shifts and to do business in a way that offers people healing and hope.
For sure. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Our guest has been Dr. Megan Harvey. So much gratitude for having you here, and we appreciate this conversation. We will talk to you all in our next episode. And so until then, take care.
Bye, everybody.
Take care,
Thanks.
everybody. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Practical for Your Practice.
Please feel free to subscribe, like, and share.
Until next time.